Welcome to Vale Marks, where every scar tells a story, and every story leaves a mark. What if one small act of kindness could change two broken lives forever? This isn't just a tale about a woman and a dog. It's about the things we lose, the trust we rebuild, and the silent bonds that carry us home. Stay with us until the end, because buried in this quiet story is a lesson that just might stay with you long after the screen fades to black. And if it touches you, don't forget to subscribe. Your support helps us create stories that matter. The late autumn sun was slipping behind the tree line, casting long golden streaks across the peeling paint of Emily Harper's mobile home. The breeze was crisp, carrying with it the scent of fallen leaves and something else, something almost nostalgic, like the soft echo of a memory she couldn't quite touch. Emily sat on the front steps of her worn porch, a chipped mug of lukewarm coffee cupped in her hands. She wasn't really drinking it. She hadn't taken a sip in at least 10 minutes. Instead, she stared blankly at the fading horizon. Her thoughts, like broken glass, scattered across a cold wooden floor, sharp, aimless, and too many to pick up. Her house was small, more rust than metal now, with duct tape around the window edges and a screen door that screeched every time the wind brushed past it. It wasn't much, but it was hers. Or at least it had been, until the eviction notice showed up 3 weeks ago. She didn't cry. Emily hadn't cried in years. Not when her parents died in that freak highway accident. Not when her younger brother was adopted by another family and she was left behind in the system. And not even when Matthew, her once fiancé, called off the wedding with a cold, polite email that simply read, "I'm sorry, Emily. I'm not ready." She had learned, somewhere along the way, that silence hurt less than tears. As she watched the shadows lengthen across the overgrown yard, she thought she heard something, just the faintest scuffling noise, soft as a sigh, coming from beneath the porch. She blinked, pulled her tattered sweater tighter around her shoulders, and tilted her head. There it was again. Curious, she leaned over and peered beneath the steps. That's when she saw him. A dog, a pit bull. Ash gray, ribs visible even in the fading light, legs trembling as if the ground beneath him offered no comfort. His head was low, body curled into itself, pressed tight into the farthest, darkest corner he could find. But what struck Emily most wasn't his body. It was his eyes. Those eyes. They were wide and cautious, flooded with fear. But somewhere buried in that fear was something softer. A flicker. A question. Emily didn't move for a long moment. She just stared back. The world around them, the creaking trees, the distant hum of a truck on the highway, seemed to fall away. It was as if time paused to listen. He looked at her like he didn't want to be seen, and yet somehow he had been waiting for someone to see him. His eyes didn't beg for food or warmth. They said something simpler, more painful. "I don't want to be a bother. I just didn't know where else to go." Emily inhaled slowly, heart aching in a way she hadn't expected. There was something about that look, about the way he flinched even under the softest glance, that cracked open a part of her chest she'd long boarded shut. Carefully, she stood up, stepping lightly across the creaky porch floorboards. Inside the fridge, she found a single slice of turkey sandwich meat, leftover from lunch if she remembered right. She also grabbed an old paper plate, cracked at the edge but still usable. She returned to the porch and sat down cross-legged, laying the meat out in front of her and inching the plate just to the edge of the steps. "I'm not gonna hurt you," she said softly, barely above a whisper. "You can have it if you want." At first, he didn't move, but then his nose twitched. Slowly, with the wary grace of something that had learned the hard way not to trust, he inched forward. His paws were raw, and he winced as he stepped. But hunger finally outweighed fear. He reached the plate, and with a quick dart of his tongue, took the meat. Then another bite, and another. Within seconds, the plate was clean, and he looked up at her again, those same haunted eyes, now just a little less guarded. She smiled, not wide, just enough to show she meant no harm. "You're safe here," she murmured. The dog lowered his head but didn't retreat. Instead, he lay down, still tense, but no longer trembling. For a while, Emily said nothing. She just sat with him, watching the sun slip beneath the horizon, painting the sky in bruised purples and soft rose. The quiet between them was fragile, but it was something. A beginning, maybe. Two beings, both frayed around the edges, both wondering if the world had a place left for them. Sitting together on a weathered porch, under a sky that had seen too much. No names, no promises. Just the silent understanding of two souls that knew what it meant to be forgotten, and what it meant to be found. The stars were just beginning to dot the night sky as Emily sat alone on the porch, knees drawn up to her chest, arms wrapped tightly around them. The warmth of the afternoon had faded, replaced by the crisp bite of autumn air. From the edge of the porch, the soft sound of breathing came, slow and tentative. Blaze, she had started calling him. The ash-gray pit bull with soulful eyes who had appeared out of nowhere. He lay curled beneath the porch again, but this time not out of fear. Tonight he seemed to be listening, perhaps waiting. Emily wasn't sure why, but his presence stirred something deep in her, a place she hadn't dared revisit in years. She tilted her head to the sky and let her eyes rest on the constellations. The quiet brought with it a flood of memories. Unwelcome, uninvited, but insistent. And among them, always, was Max. Max had been her first pit bull. No, not just a pit bull. He had been her heart. She was 9 when her father found Max at a gas station parking lot, tied to a fence with nothing but a frayed rope and a bowl of dirty water. Emily had begged to bring him home, and for once, her father, usually strict and no-nonsense, had said yes without hesitation. Maybe he saw what she did, that Max wasn't just a dog. He was lost, scared, and so much like her. Max was a cinnamon-colored pit bull with eyes full of emotion. He followed Emily everywhere, waited at the door when she left for school, slept at the foot of her bed every night, and growled at the thunder when she cried during storms. When kids at school made fun of her worn-out shoes or the second-hand clothes that smelled faintly of mothballs, she'd come home to Max and tell him everything. He was her only friend when friendship was in short supply. But the world has a way of turning on things it doesn't understand. One day, when Max was just lounging in their tiny fenced yard, a neighbor's cat wandered too close. Max didn't hurt it. He didn't even bark. He just stared, ears alert. But the neighbor, a woman with sharp eyes and a sharper tongue, panicked. "That dog's dangerous," she declared. "You shouldn't have that breed around children." What followed was a blur of warnings, complaints, and paperwork. One afternoon, Emily came home from school to find Max gone. No goodbyes, no explanation that made sense. Just her father's quiet voice saying, "We had no choice, Em." They said he was a threat. A threat. Emily had screamed then, not because of what they said about Max, but because no one had fought for him, not even her. She never saw Max again, and in losing him, she didn't just lose a dog. She lost the only being in the world who had loved her without judgment, who had never once seen her as less. After that, she'd built her walls brick by brick. She didn't ask for help. She didn't believe in second chances. She simply endured. Until tonight. She looked down at Blaze, who had shifted slightly closer to the porch, one paw stretched out. His eyes were closed, but his ears still twitched, tuned in to her every breath. Something about him, the scars, the way he flinched at sudden movement, felt hauntingly familiar. And yet, different. Blaze wasn't Max, but Blaze had arrived broken too. And this time, maybe she could make a different choice. Her chest tightened as she whispered into the night. I didn't get to protect Max. I let them take him. I didn't fight. A tear slid down her cheek, slow and hot. She hadn't spoken those words aloud in years. Blaze's ears twitched at the sound of her voice. His eyes opened, soft and cautious, and he looked at her like he understood, as if he was waiting for the rest of the story. Emily leaned forward, her voice barely audible. I was too young. I didn't know how to make them listen. But maybe you're my second chance? The breeze lifted her hair from her face, cool and gentle. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked, and Blaze flinched but didn't retreat. I'm not a kid anymore, Emily continued, and I won't let anyone tell me you don't belong. Not again. She felt her heart open, just a sliver, because Blaze had come to her porch, not just hungry, not just scared, but bearing the weight of a story she'd lived once before. And if she believed in signs, if she believed in fate, maybe this was it. A chance to do for this dog what she hadn't been able to do for Max. To choose compassion without apology. To fight if she had to. To be brave. The night deepened, and she stood up, stepping quietly inside. When she returned, she had an old towel in one hand and a bowl of warm water in the other. Come here, boy, she said gently. Blaze hesitated, then slowly rose, his body still wary but less tense. He took 2 steps forward, then another. Emily kneeled and waited. He came close enough for her to wrap the towel around him, just barely touching his damp fur. As she wiped the grime from his coat, he stood still, trusting. She smiled through the tears. Welcome home, Blaze, she said. And for the first time in a very long time, she felt like maybe she had come home too. The morning after Blaze slept beneath her porch, Emily made a decision. It wasn't grand or world-changing, just a simple act that felt right. She wrapped a small leftover sandwich from her fridge, tucked it into her tote, and headed to the convenience store where she worked the late shift as a cashier. The store was nothing special, a dusty, fluorescent-lit corner shop with half-stocked shelves and a flickering neon sign out front. Still, it was Emily's only steady income. Mr. Clay Boone, the owner, was a man of strict rules and tighter margins. He prided himself on keeping his business clean and his employees quiet. Emily had learned early to keep her head down and smile at customers, no matter how tired or hollow she felt inside. That afternoon, as the last wave of school kids cleared out with bags of chips and soda, Emily took a moment during her break. She stepped out the back door, carefully checking that Boone was busy in his office. Blaze was there, waiting in the narrow alley behind the store. He wasn't wagging his tail, but when he saw her, he sat up and gave a slow blink of recognition. Hey, buddy, Emily murmured, kneeling beside him. She unwrapped the sandwich and laid it down on a piece of wax paper, careful not to startle him. Blaze sniffed it, then took small, delicate bites, as if afraid to offend. He was still thin, ribs like piano keys beneath his rough fur, but his eyes looked clearer now, more awake, more alive. She reached out and let her fingers graze the edge of his ear. This time he didn't pull away. You're doing better, she said, a smile tugging at the corner of her lips. I can see it. From behind her, a sharp throat clear shattered the quiet. Emily turned, heart lurching. Standing a few yards away, arms crossed and sunglasses gleaming, was Mr. Radley, a longtime customer and local businessman, always dressed in tailored suits, always eager to give unsolicited advice on getting ahead in life. He was watching her with a mix of confusion and disdain. That your dog? He asked flatly. No, Emily replied, rising slowly. Just a stray. I've been helping him. Radley's nose wrinkled. Feeding strays behind a business? Not exactly a good look. Emily didn't respond. She didn't owe him an explanation, but she knew enough to feel the heat of humiliation crawling up her neck. Radley gave her a thin-lipped smirk and walked back inside without another word. She stood in the alley for another second, then knelt quickly to pat Blaze. "It's fine," she whispered. "It's just food. Just kindness." But it wasn't fine. 30 minutes later, Boone summoned her from aisle 4. He didn't wait until they were alone. He didn't lower his voice. Right there, in front of 2 browsing customers and a teenage co-worker restocking gum near the register, he let loose. "Emily," he barked, "did you give food to some mutt out back?" The store went quiet. She froze, clutching the small receipt pad in her hand. "I asked you a question." She nodded slowly. "Yes, I had some leftovers. I didn't use store inventory. I don't care if it was scraps from your grandmother's grave," he snapped. "You fed a stray on my property. Do you realize the liability, the health code risks, the image it gives?" Emily opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Boone's face reddened. "You think people want to see mangy dogs loitering around where they shop for food? You're done. You're finished here." The words hit harder than she expected. He didn't ask her to clock out. He didn't even hand her a final paycheck. He just turned and stormed back into his office, the glass door swinging shut behind him. For a moment, Emily stood in the fluorescent silence. Her co-workers looked away, pretending to be busy. One customer offered a half-sympathetic glance, then returned to the freezer section. She didn't argue. She didn't cry. She walked quietly to the back, grabbed her jacket from the hook, and slipped out the side door. Blaze was still there, lying in the same spot, unaware of what had just happened. When he saw her, his tail thumped weakly against the pavement. Emily crouched down and gathered him gently into her arms. He stiffened at first, then went still, his head resting against her shoulder. They walked away from the store, her tote bag half-zipped, her heart entirely broken. She didn't know what stung more: losing her job in public, or the fact that not one person had stood up for her. She had always tried to be quiet, dependable. She never asked for favors, never broke the rules. Except this time. This one time, she'd followed her heart, and she'd been punished for it. She looked down at Blaze, his breathing steady, his body finally trusting hers. Maybe, she thought, that wasn't failure. Maybe it was proof that even if the world turned cold, even if kindness came with consequences, she had made the right call. And somehow, in the dull ache of everything she'd lost, that still mattered. Maybe even more than before. That evening, after being dismissed from the store, Emily returned to her mobile home to find a red eviction notice taped to the door. She stood there for a long while, clutching Blaze's leash, her heart sinking deeper than she thought possible. With no money left to pay for the lot space or utilities, the home that once gave her a fragile sense of belonging was no longer hers. She gathered a small bag of essentials and walked away, not looking back. That night, as cold wind whispered through the empty streets, Emily and Blaze found shelter under the roof of an abandoned post office, no longer just lonely, but truly homeless. By nightfall, the temperature had dropped below freezing. The air was sharp with the scent of wet asphalt and fallen leaves, and a slow drizzle had turned into steady rain. Emily's coat, already too thin for autumn, clung to her shoulders, soaked through. She had wandered the streets for hours after losing her job, unsure where to go, the weight of the world pressing down like a sodden blanket. Blaze followed closely by her side, his paws muddy, his head low, fur matted and cold. He didn't whine, didn't complain, just walked beside her, as though knowing she had no answers either. Eventually, they found shelter beneath the overhang of an old, boarded-up post office. The awning offered just enough protection from the rain. The building had long been forgotten, its windows dark, paint peeling, and walls damp with time. But to Emily, it felt like the only place left in the world. She sat on the concrete step, legs pulled in tight, arms wrapped around herself. Blaze curled at her feet, shivering slightly but still pressing into her side. Her bag was soaked, her wallet nearly empty, and her phone battery long dead. For the first time in what felt like forever, Emily allowed herself to cry. Not just a tear or two, but a raw, quiet unraveling. It was the kind of cry that came from deep in the chest, when the body finally surrendered to everything it had held in. The grief of losing her family so young, the helplessness of watching her little brother be taken in by a foster home while she was left behind, the heartbreak of a love that left without goodbye, the humiliation of being fired in front of strangers, and now, the cold reality of having nowhere to go, with a dog that had no one but her. Rain tapped softly above her like a lullaby for the broken. Blaze shifted and laid his head on her knee. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice thick. "I don't know what to do next." Then, through the blur of tears and drizzle, she heard footsteps. She stiffened. A figure approached through the rain, not hurried, not hesitant, just steady. A tall man in a worn denim jacket, broad-shouldered with a wool cap, pulled low over his forehead. His face was weathered, maybe mid-50s, with silver at his temples and eyes like quiet lakes. Deep, steady, unreadable. He didn't say anything at first. Instead, he reached into a paper bag and pulled out a steaming takeout cup. Without a word, he held it out. Emily hesitated. Blaze lifted his head slightly, watching, but didn't growl or move to shield her. The man spoke, his voice low and rough like gravel soaked in kindness. "It's Black. From the gas station down the road. Not fancy, but warm." Emily slowly reached out and took the cup, her fingers brushing his. "Thank you," she said, her voice hoarse. He nodded, then stepped under the awning, keeping a respectful distance, but not leaving. They sat in silence for a while. The only sound, the rain and the occasional hum of a car passing on the wet road. "My name's Lucas," he said finally. "Lucas Hart. Been around this town long enough to know most folks, but I don't think we've met." "I'm Emily," she replied softly, cradling the cup like a lifeline. "And this is Blaze." Lucas looked at the dog, who now sat calmly beside her. "Pitbull?" he asked. She nodded. "He found me a few days ago, or maybe I found him. Not really sure anymore." Lucas studied them both, then looked out into the rain. "You from around here?" Emily exhaled a shaky breath. "Not exactly. Been floating place to place since I was 16. Worked a dozen jobs. Never really stuck anywhere." He didn't press for details. Didn't ask the usual prodding questions like strangers do when they want to sound helpful, but don't care enough to hear the real answers. Instead, he just listened. And for some reason, Emily found herself talking, telling him about the night Blaze appeared under her porch, the job she lost, the look in Boone's eyes when he fired her, and the quiet despair she hadn't spoken aloud to anyone, not even herself. Lucas didn't interrupt. He didn't offer empty reassurances or judge her choices. When she finished, he simply nodded and looked over at Blaze again. "He trusts you," he said. "That says something." Emily looked down. Blaze was lying peacefully now, his head resting on her boot. "He doesn't usually warm up to people," she said. Lucas tilted his head, his gaze still calm. "Dogs know who's safe. You'd be surprised how smart they are when it comes to hearts." Emily gave a weak smile. The warmth from the coffee had reached her chest now, and though the rain hadn't stopped, something inside her had quieted. Lucas stood and rubbed the back of his neck. "I've got a small cabin out by the edge of town. Not much, just wood walls, a stove, and a roof that leaks in one corner. Used to use it for fishing weekends, but it's been empty a while." Emily blinked. "Okay. If you and Blaze need a place to dry off," he said gently, "it's yours for now. I'm not offering charity. I just don't like seeing good people freezing in the rain when I've got an empty shelter collecting dust." Emily stared at him, unsure if she'd heard right. You'd let us stay there? Lucas shrugged. No strings. No judgments. Just a key and a warm place to sleep. She didn't answer right away. Her mind was already filled with warning bells. What if it wasn't safe? What if he wasn't who he said? What if she was making another mistake? But then Blaze stood up, walked toward Lucas, and slowly, gently sat at his feet. Lucas reached down, brushing a hand over the dog's back. No growl, no flinch, just calm. Emily felt something in her chest shift, like a door creaking open she'd long ago locked shut. Maybe it was time to believe in good people again. Maybe it was okay to accept help, just this once. She stood, still holding the coffee cup, and looked Lucas in the eye. "All right," she said quietly. "We'll come with you." Lucas smiled, just barely. "It's about a 15-minute walk. Hope Blaze doesn't mind getting wet." Emily glanced at her companion, now trotting beside Lucas like he'd known the man forever. "I think he'll be okay," she said. "I think we both will." It started with a shaky 30-second video. No one knew who had taken it, perhaps a teenager passing by or a delivery driver waiting outside. But within hours of it being posted, the clip had already gone viral. In the frame, Emily stood beside a weathered dumpster behind the convenience store. She was crouched down, gently offering scraps of leftover meat to Blaze, who looked more bones than dog. The tenderness in her touch was unmistakable, the quiet care in her body language. Blaze's tail wagged once, nervous, tentative. Then came the harsh voice of Mr. Boone, echoing like thunder across the alley. "You're fired!" The words cracked through the air. The phone's camera trembled, catching the moment Emily stood, pale but silent, gently lifting the dog into her arms. Her back was to the lens, but the curve of her shoulders said it all. She wasn't ashamed, only tired, only heartbroken. The caption read, "Fired for feeding a hungry dog." Where did we lose our humanity? And the internet responded. By the next morning, thousands of shares had turned into tens of thousands. Comments poured in. Kindness is not a crime. This woman is a hero. Pit bulls aren't villains. Ignorance is. News outlets picked up the story. Talk shows debated it. Animal advocacy pages reposted it with hashtags like #Justice for Blaze and #Compassion Matters. But Emily? She had no idea. For the first day or two, she didn't even check her phone. She stayed in the cabin with Blaze, helping Lucas repair a leaky pipe in the bathroom and organizing donated supplies in the back room. It wasn't until Tanya, a former co-worker from the convenience store, showed up at the cabin door, out of breath and half laughing, that Emily learned the storm she had stirred. "Emily," Tanya said, waving her phone, "you're everywhere." "What do you mean?" Emily asked, genuinely confused. "You're viral. People are calling you a modern-day saint." Emily blinked, stunned. "For what?" "I got fired." Tanya stepped inside, showing her the video, the comments, the support threads. "For doing the right thing." Emily sat down slowly on the edge of the old couch. Blaze came over and rested his head on her lap as if sensing her confusion. "I didn't mean to cause a scene," she said quietly. "I just didn't want him to go hungry." "That's the point," Tanya said gently. "You did something simple, and people remembered what that looks like." Within days, the quiet cabin became a destination. Neighbors and strangers alike began dropping off donations, bags of dog food, blankets, even envelopes with handwritten notes and small bills. One woman, a retiree named Mrs. Hensley, brought Emily a homemade casserole and a knitted scarf. "For you," she said with a soft smile, "and for the little one, too." Emily tried to refuse the money at first. "Please," she'd say, "you don't have to do this." But people insisted, not because she was famous, not because they pitied her, but because they were reminded in her quiet act of something they'd forgotten, how powerful a small kindness could be. And then came Lucas, standing in the kitchen one morning with a cup of coffee and that familiar, thoughtful look on his face. "I've been thinking," he said, watching Blaze play with a new chew toy by the fireplace, "about how we could use your help." Emily turned from the sink. "With what?" Lucas set down his mug. "You know that cabin isn't just a cabin, right?" Emily frowned. "What do you mean?" He smiled slightly. "It's part of a community outreach program I run. We help folks who are down on their luck, vets, runaways, seniors without family, and sometimes their animals too. It started small, but we've grown. Trouble is, we're short-staffed." Emily looked at him carefully. "Are you offering me a job?" "I'm offering you a chance," he replied, "to make use of that heart of yours. You've got a way with people, and clearly with dogs. If you're willing, I'd like you to help with intake, support services, anything you're up for. It won't make you rich, but I promise, it'll make you useful." That word echoed in her mind. Useful. It had been so long since she'd felt like she mattered. Like she was more than just another person surviving from paycheck to paycheck, easily discarded by someone like Boone when her humanity got in the way of profits. Now, with Blaze beside her, and strangers reaching out with kindness, and Lucas trusting her with something bigger, Emily felt something she hadn't felt in years. A purpose she accepted. The first day she stepped into the center, Blaze trotting proudly beside her with a bright red bandana around his neck, Emily felt nerves creep up, but they were quickly replaced by gratitude. People welcomed her, listened to her. And when a young mother came in, crying softly with her toddler and a limping terrier, Emily knelt beside her and offered both a warm blanket and a gentle hand. "I know," she said quietly. "It's going to be okay." That night, as she curled up in bed with Blaze asleep at her feet, Emily looked around the small room with its mismatched lamps and peeling wallpaper and smiled. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't viral anymore, but it was real, and it was enough. The City Hall chamber buzzed with anticipation. Rows of chairs were filled. City council members on their raised platform, reporters with notepads, residents clutching signs that read, "Compassion is policy," and "Support animal rescue funding." It was a cold, gray morning, with a faint drizzle lingering outside, but the air inside burned with tension. Today's agenda was a vote on a local ordinance that would redirect funds to support the under-resourced animal rescue centers across the city. What made this day different was the face attached to the cause. Emily. Invited to speak after her story had stirred the community, she sat quietly in the second row, her hands folded tightly in her lap. She wore a simple navy sweater, hair tucked behind her ears, her nerves barely concealed by her calm exterior. Blaze lay beside her feet, wearing his now signature red bandana, his eyes alert but calm. The moderator called the meeting to order. Murmurs fell into hush. "Next, we'll hear from Ms. Emily Sloan, community volunteer and advocate," the mayor announced, adjusting his glasses. Emily stood slowly, heart pounding as she approached the wooden podium. She felt everyone watching. City leaders, news cameras, local residents, people she didn't know but who now seemed invested in her every word. "Good morning," she began, voice steady but soft. "I'm not a politician, I'm not a leader. I never asked to be in this position. I just fed a hungry dog." A gentle ripple of recognition moved through the audience. A few heads nodded. Someone whispered, "That's her." Emily continued. It was a simple act, but what followed, being fired, being shamed, revealed something bigger. Not about me, but about what we value, about what we're willing to stand up for. She paused. That night, when I saw Blaze trembling in the cold, I didn't see a stray. I saw something that reminded me of myself. Scared, overlooked, discarded. I didn't give him food because I had extra. I gave it because I recognized that look in his eyes, a look I used to see every morning in the mirror. The chamber fell silent, but before the mayor could thank her, another voice rang out from the back, rough, familiar, and sharp. "Excuse me," it barked. "I have something to say." Heads turned. From the side entrance, Mr. Boone stepped forward, wearing a pressed blazer, lips pursed like he was holding in years of resentment. His presence sucked the warmth from the room like a draft of cold air. "I'm Clay Boone," he declared, "owner of South Point Market, where Ms. Sloan used to work." He marched to the podium's side, eyes trained on Emily, his voice louder now, designed for drama. "She's left out a few details, like the fact that she took company food without permission. That's theft. She broke rules, put our store's image at risk, and now she's being celebrated like some sort of saint." Gasps echoed through the crowd. A few people shook their heads. Someone muttered, "Seriously?" Emily didn't move. She stood frozen, caught in a storm she thought she'd left behind. Boone went on, hands slicing the air for emphasis. "I've lost business, loyal customers, staff, all because of her little moment of kindness that made it online. She never took responsibility. She never apologized. And now you want her to be the face of a city-funded program?" The moderator raised a hand. "Sir, please keep it civil." Boone glared. "I am being civil. But if this council supports rewarding rule breakers, what message does that send?" Silence. Then, slowly, Emily stepped forward again, standing fully at the podium while Boone lingered just off to the side. Her voice came quieter this time, but firmer, carved not from defiance, but from truth. "I didn't give away scraps because I didn't know better," she said. "I gave them away because I did." She turned slightly toward Boone. "You talk about image, about rules, but tell me, what image does it send when a store chooses to humiliate someone for showing empathy? What rule tells us to look away from suffering just to save face?" Then she faced the council again. "When I fed Blaze, I saw more than a hungry dog. I saw fear, abandonment, the same emotions I carried growing up after losing my parents, after my brother was adopted away, after being left alone by people who didn't have time for someone like me." She swallowed, eyes misting. "I didn't choose this spotlight. But if I have it now, I want to use it to say this. Kindness isn't weakness. It isn't soft. It's survival. For animals. For people. For everyone who's ever felt forgotten." A hush filled the chamber like a held breath, and then, quietly, so quietly you might miss it, Blaze stood from where he'd been resting. Without a command, without hesitation, he walked up to Emily at the podium. He pressed his head gently against her leg and looked up at her with those soft amber eyes. No barks, no tricks, just a gesture of absolute trust. The room erupted. Applause thundered across the floor. Some stood. The mayor smiled broadly. Even council members who had been neutral began to nod. The power of that simple, wordless moment said more than any speech could. Boone, still at the edge of the stage, seemed to shrink. He looked around, saw the response, the energy, the rising tide, and stepped back without another word. Emily didn't smile. She didn't raise her hands in victory. She just reached down and gently petted Blaze's head. Together, under the bright dome lights of that council chamber, they stood like living proof that courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes it kneels in the cold and shares a meal. The sign above the wooden structure read, "Blaze's Porch." It wasn't big or flashy, just a simple awning of fresh cedar strung with small solar-powered lanterns that glowed like fireflies when night came. Beneath it sat a weathered bench, a clean water bowl, a bin of blankets, and a handmade wooden box filled with kibble. There was even a small tin of dog treats tucked behind a note that read, "For the good boys who made it through another hard day." Blaze curled up on a rug near the entrance, his head resting on his paws, eyes half closed in the afternoon sun. His coat, once dull and patchy, now gleamed with health. A bright blue vest around his body bore the words, "Therapy Dog" in white stitching. He'd earned it after months of training and visits to local mental health clinics where he offered silent companionship to war veterans, teens struggling with anxiety, and mothers dealing with loss. He was no longer just a stray. He was a healer. Emily stepped out of the community center nearby, a stack of flyers in her hand. She moved with quiet purpose, a calm steadiness in her step that hadn't been there a year ago. She wore no makeup, no jewelry, just jeans, sneakers, and a sweatshirt that read, "Be kind anyway." She didn't need anything more than that. She was someone who had found where she belonged. She had taken on the role of communications manager for the nonprofit Lucas had founded. She helped write stories, ran social media accounts, coordinated donation drives, and made sure every stray dog or lonely soul who wandered through the center found a place to be heard. But Blaze's porch was her favorite part of the job. It was her idea, after all. A place for people like she once was, lost, unsure, holding on to whatever scrap of hope they could find. A dry place to rest for the night. A bowl of food for a four-legged friend. A reminder that someone out there still cared. One chilly morning in early spring, Emily was setting out another crate of supplies when a man approached. He wore a flat cap, gray slacks, and an expression of practiced humility. For a moment, she didn't recognize him. Then she saw the familiar tightness in his jaw, the way he walked like someone used to being watched but not welcomed. "Mr. Boone," she said softly, standing up straighter. He stopped a few feet away, hat in his hands. I heard what you've been doing," he began. His voice, once sharp and commanding, now wavered like an old record. "The dog, the porch, the kids you help at the clinic, it's, impressive." Emily didn't reply. She just waited. Boone swallowed hard. "I came to say, I'm sorry. For everything. I was wrong." There was no crowd to witness it, no cameras or dramatic music. Just a man, flawed and older than he looked, offering the only thing he could. A quiet apology. Emily nodded once. "I don't hate you," she said. "I never did." Boone blinked, surprised. "I just hope," she continued, "that somewhere in your life someone gave you a porch, too, like I gave Blaze, because everyone deserves one, even when they don't know it." Boone looked down, then gave a small, grateful nod. He turned and left without another word. That evening, the sky painted the town in soft strokes of amber and rose. Emily sat on the porch's bench, a paperback novel in her hands. She wasn't reading, not really, just watching the horizon melt into gold. Blaze lay beside her, his body warm against her boots, his breathing slow and content. A young girl passed by with her mother, clutching a worn, stuffed animal. She stopped to wave at Blaze, who perked up just enough to offer a wag of his tail. The girl giggled. Emily smiled to herself. No one would know from looking at them how far they'd come. From a decaying mobile home, from hunger and silence, from job loss and public shaming, from shadows and broken systems, and the brittle edge of despair. But now, here they were, beneath a porch that no longer leaked, beside a dog that no longer flinched. There were still hard days, of course, still loneliness and nights when the old fears crept in like fog. But now there was also purpose, community, the soft nudge of a dog's nose on her hand when she needed grounding. The letters from hospital patients who said Blaze had made them smile when nothing else could. The late-night visits from teenagers who'd run away but knew this was a place they could come, even just for a moment of kindness. Emily leaned down and stroked Blaze's ear. He looked up, his eyes reflecting the last bit of sun before it disappeared behind the hills. "We're okay now," she whispered. Aren't we, buddy? Blaze didn't answer, of course, but his head rested gently on her knee, and that was all she needed. Sometimes the most powerful endings are not the ones that shout, they're the ones that exhale. And so, beneath a newly painted roof, on a porch once forgotten but now filled with light, a woman and a dog watched the day disappear, not with fear or sadness, but with quiet, steady hope. The porch was no longer broken. Neither were they. As the sun sets behind that little porch, now glowing softly with lantern light, remember this. Kindness doesn't need to be grand to be life-changing. Sometimes it's as simple as sharing shelter or offering a name to someone forgotten. Emily gave Blaze more than a home. She gave him purpose. And Blaze gave her something just as powerful, the courage to start again. Here on Veil Marks, we believe in stories that restore faith in humanity. If this one moved you, please let us know in the comments. Every word you leave behind is a spark that helps us keep going. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button. We're on a journey to reach 1,000 subscribers, and with your help, we're getting closer. It's not just a number, it's a reminder that stories like these matter, that the world still listens, that people still care. As Fred Rogers once said, look for the helpers. You will always find people who are helping. Emily became one of those people. And maybe, just maybe, so can we. Thank you for watching. Thank you for believing. And thank you for being part of Veil Marks, where every ending is just a new beginning in disguise.